So, hello. I sometimes go by the name Sciatic Nerd. And when I do, I like to talk about things. Tonight's thing that we're going to talk about is your data just a little less cloudy. At least we're going to talk about personal cloud stuff. And this is kind of a weird journey. So thank you for sticking with me, even though I can't apparently advance a slide. All right, so disclaimer, there are bound to be better ways to do what I'm about to share. Other ways, better ways, more efficient, advanced. You know what? Correct me. Tell me, please, because this is just what I've been doing and what I have found that works so far for me. You may know of another way, and I want to know what that is, or at least it would be great if we could share that with each other as we learn, hopefully together. So, oh look, now it works. Hey, you know what? Have you ever noticed that we're always out of space, or it seems like we are? I don't know about you, but when I get onto my mobile device, I go to use it, and then I remember I was so excited when I first got my mobile, and I said, oh, it wants to back up the entire device for me. That means if it blows up, I can just pull it back down, and isn't that cool? But then something happened along the way, and it said, excuse me, yeah, you're out of room and we can't back up for you right now. Isn't that scary? I went, what? What is it full of? And you go and you look at the little settings that show you all the stuff that it's full of, and you're like, well, maybe if I delete some of this, I can get some. No, there's still not enough room. Huh. Crazy how that is. And it doesn't matter which one of the big companies you talk about, they all seem to be allergic to or excited to help you fill up your space. They all want to make sure that I have every piece of data. If I sneezed near the phone, it records it and takes up a little more room, because they all want you to do the same thing, right? And so I said, oh, okay. Now these are all terrible screen captures I just grabbed from around the net. The actual first one was actually from my own phone, which I think is hilarious, because at the end of it, it comes back to the same thing. Would you like to give us just a couple of bucks so that we can continue protecting all your stuff? Please, for your stuff, for the sake, won't you think of your stuff? We would love it if you would treat us like you lock it storage and let us hang on to it for you. And if you ever stop paying, we won't give it back to you until you pay us some more. Okay, well, that's not really that expensive, but not everybody is in a position or wants to afford. I mean, sure, $3 a month doesn't sound like a lot, but when you get to a whole year, that starts to add up or more. Well, all right, so we all know the rule at this point, I think, that if you are getting something for nothing, there's a trade. You just may not be aware of what the trade is. In this case, you are the product. Yeah, we are. That's why social media sites are free, right? Because every time we engage, it's turned into the same thing AM talk radio did years and years ago. You get someone on there who, they call them a shock jock, and they get on there and they say something to get your blood moving so that you'll call in. In fact, I know at least one person who used to get asked by his buddies to go on the sports show because he knew sports stuff and he knew what buttons to push to get other people to call in saying, that guy, I don't like what that person's saying. So on occasion, you get, okay, could you call in and they made up a name for him and the whole thing. And it was an actual shtick they did. And oh, by the way, this article is a legit article. You could actually go and read about some of the collection, the data collection done by the large companies and how they're using your information. There are other ones by EFF and others, but I just wanted to grab one reference so that in case you weren't already aware of this, this is something to keep in the back of your mind every time you agree or allow a service to continue accessing your stuff. Okay. And this is what made me laugh. While making this presentation, I went to use the gallery app on my computer, and before I could get to the list of screenshots, I was presented with, make room for your memories. Wouldn't you like to buy more, please? That's going in. Fine, that's ridiculous. This is what I'm talking about. It makes me crazy because I feel like this shouldn't be a thing. So my brother a few years ago had told me they got very concerned about losing the pictures of my niece as she's been growing up. So they have a complete mirror of all the family photos locally. Now my brother went out and bought a NAS, a network attached storage device. You guys, who does not know what a NAS is? Anybody? We're all super familiar with this stuff here? Okay, cool. I didn't. Nice.
What does NAS stand for?
Network attached storage. So it is a storage container of hard drives. It's a big fat, it's like a personal cloud. The thing is, you have to use specialized software, maybe you know a little networking stuff to get that to work, right? Well, I invested in one of those because I had gone through a hard drive crash of my own and lost a bunch of my photography work because I used to do weddings and events, and I bought one of those big, expensive, more expensive, especially to me at the time, spinning drives, right? Set it up, 5 terabytes. I was excited. I moved everything from all the little smaller laptop drives that I had bought over the years, and I went back a year later to go and add stuff and review, and the drive would not turn on. I mean, power it up, but it would zzz, over and over. And I'm like, that is almost 10 years worth of photo portfolio. And I went through a lot trying to get it back. So now I'm willing to invest in this NAS to try and do it again for myself. And I went through and found out where I could turn off all the options on my mobile device so that it's not filling up that storage anymore. And even to the point where I took all the photos off and put them on the NAS. But my brother and sister-in-law, they have a full copy on their NAS in the Amazon cloud, on their Apple cloud thing, and then another one in their Microsoft storage, because through different things you get, you're gifted X amount of storage, right? So if you buy this office suite, access to this office suite, they'll give you a bunch of storage space. If you give us a couple of bucks and say you want to store some we'll give you. So they're probably spending more than 10 bucks a month, I'll say, conservatively, on separate storage clouds. But they also have one hidden away in a closet somewhere. They've got one of their own. I'm like, why do you need that many? I mean, that seems like, are these national secrets? Well, to them, pictures of my niece, they might as well be. So I get it. But what if I didn't want to put all of my stuff in that free storage or in something else? Let's talk for a minute about things you can do if you think about the cost, right? What kind of costs are there? Different kinds of costs, right? The obvious one is money. Not everybody is going to have the same opportunity because of whatever their situation is. You could be a student, you could be someone going through a life change, you could just decide that this isn't in my budget for whatever reason. So maybe you don't want to just give money to a big company that's you're trusting to not have an outage or lose all your stuff. What about other options? Well, what's the most expensive thing I have? My time. That's the most expensive thing. No matter what else I can do, I can argue about how much the value of currency is, but the one thing I can't get back is the time that I have, and what I give of myself is that's something that's an investment, right? And that's what I'm trying to lean into, is this concept of investment. Are you investing in this storage and learning something? Where are you putting your investment? Which brings us to, well then, what would you use it for? If you decided you wanted to run something on your own equipment rather than going out and getting a bunch of different things. Let's talk about the use cases for a minute. Maybe you are in classes, so that means you're going to have some kind of note-taking application, maybe, and that's cloud-based, so that, hey, I can get to it from my tablet or my mobile device, another mobile, or my desktop. Maybe I'm going to do something about organization. That's a separate service, usually, right? With one of those little drag and drop the notes from here to there in different columns. That's a separate service. They have a free tier, but there are limits to that. Well, maybe I want collaborative stuff so that I can share. Well, that's a different service again, right? Okay, well, you know, I like listening to my podcasts, my shows. my audiobooks. Cool, I've got to have this thing with me. Well, if it turns out I don't have this thing, whatever it is in your case, with me, well, I always have my phone. Well, okay, but when you're sitting at your desk, sometimes don't you put on different headsets? So how are you going to get, well, where did I leave off? Well, maybe I wanted to be able to, kind of like on the big streaming services, right? Maybe I want it to pick up in the same spot no matter where I am. And on and on and on. There are bunches of things. Maybe I want to do my finances and I don't want to pay somebody big money. So you know what? There are a lot of very creative people who do free and open source software, or a free tier and a pay tier of a whole application suite. But you got to have somewhere to run it. So think about that for a minute. What do you need to make this work? Well, okay, there are risks involved. What kind of risks? Well, I could have a power outage or a piece of network gear at my home goes out. Okay, well, that's a larger risk. If you lose the drive, something gets corrupted, you lose your data. So it's important to be able to know that you have at least a backup or a hot swap or something to keep in mind. But why do I want to have to run an entire cabinet of stuff? Well, let's talk about another risk. When I got out of school, I got a job and said, this is it. I am not going to have to sit by and go back to school ever again. Ha! Gosh, if I could talk to that version of myself. It's never that simple. Things get complicated. More learning will be required at some point, but young me didn't think that way. And when that job ended, I said, okay, now what do I do? I mean, that was 4 good years. But after those 4 years, I needed new skills. So depending on what your skill set is, this could help broaden your skill set. The risk is that you break stuff, but that you learn along the way. The risk is that you don't learn something new and that you stagnate and get left behind. See, I went through a rough patch when I was younger, and as I was going through this emotional bad time, I leaned in wholeheartedly in building a website for some people, learning how to set up so people could log in and then they could leave messages and they could post articles and things. And the way I did it was archaic by today's standards. And at one point I said, man, I really want to set up this new thing I was reading about this weekend. And they said, oh, okay, cool, so you're going to use, and they went down a list of things I'd never even heard of. What are these things? Don't you go and you install a lamp stack, right? Linux, what was it? Apache, MySQL, and PHP. It's good that no one knows this around here. Thank you, by the way. That's great. You've passed. Check. So that's how I was going to do it, is go and build this little stack. And everyone said, no one does that now. Well, then what do they do? And then I didn't know what to do. I started building it the old school way again. And then I ran into well, where are you going to build that? And are you going to poke holes in the home router so that people can get in there? And then what risks does that present? Well, okay, so let's talk about a different risk, opening yourself up for attack. And what about the risks of the machine itself? Maybe I haven't learned enough to secure it well enough so that other people aren't just coming in and misusing it, which is something that happened to that machine I built for those other people back in the 90s. Literally, it got owned by some Turkish kids who defaced it. And I went and because they used specific language, so I went and searched that in quotes and found where they were claiming that they had defaced it so they could get their street cred or whatever it was on the website they were on. And then they went and tried to turn my site into a reflector. I didn't know enough. Here we are all these years later.
What's a reflector?
They were using it to store data and move it, and it became a way to mirror content that they wanted, so that if someone took down one of their other sites, they had a backup. Look at that, backups are important, even to people who deface things, apparently.
You're providing them a fantastic service.
Yes. Someone gifted the group I was with an ancient server, which I figured out how to put a very early version of Ubuntu server on, and knew enough to get LampStack running. They were excited. I was excited. All of the people who wanted to do nefarious things were very excited because Because they were like, us 5, you 0. I rebuilt that thing and rebuilt it and just did not learn my lesson on how to make it less vulnerable. But that raised my awareness. That helps teach me for what's happening now. And as I was going through and explaining photo management, you want to maybe scan your documents. You have PDFs everywhere. Maybe you want to centralize some of that. Maybe you want to set up a workflow so that if you take a picture on your devices, it gets funneled to a location here, and maybe even go as far as to set up optical character recognition, OCR, so that you can search the documents that you have scanned. And you can run that on your own toys instead of paying someone else a service to do it. And that's stuff that would be kind of useful, I thought. So between that, or maybe you manage events or something, or you want to help with volunteers management, or any of these things, note-taking, media stuff, whatever media stuff, right? Maybe you've got a library of DVDs and Blu-rays and whatever, and you want to put them on there so that you can have the access to that. But how would you access that, you say? Well, to me, the first thing to consider in all of this, if you're actually going to build it, and I have built it a few times, because I've also broken it and blew it up and started over. And then that one burned down and fell into the swamp. And then wait, no, that's a different quote. But what you want, at least to start with, is some free tier of a password manager, because you're going to use what? Not the same password over and over again. Please, say it with me, do not reuse passwords. Do not, do not. Well, that sucks, that's a lot to remember. Exactly, so use one of these, choose one, and perish. Get to it, install it, get to know it just enough, but make a fresh account if you want, because that to me is a key element in what we're going to be doing. Because if we look at these things with our cost of options and how we're going to use this, we have to consider, when it comes time to build things, what are we going to use? What can you afford? What can you use to run this kind of thing? I would say, well, exactly. It turns out, by the way, that you can buy a VPS, which is a virtual private server, which might as well be a small student machine in somebody's cloud, for between $30 and a lot more a year. And they have different data caps on them and things like that. But for under $55 a year, you can buy a machine that's essentially kind of like one of these. This is a Raspberry Pi. Well, two different ones. There's a Pi 3. Sorry, this is the Pi 3. There's the Pi 4. You can tell if you look on the side, because this one has 2 video outs and this one has 1. But why am I showing that to you? We'll get to in 1 second. So, building it out, you have to have, in my head, machine, external hard drive, or some kind of storage, access to manage your own network, VPN, which we will use to secure our connection, virtualization, which you will call Docker or Podman if you are that fancy. I am not. I'm using the simplest tutorials I could find, and Docker is the thing that people seem to know, and a platform, which is a free Linux operating system of your choosing. I am so vanilla, it's Debian 12. Bookworm. Why is that important? Because you are going to follow the free tools to build out this entire environment. What I'm going to do right now is, I'll wait one more slide and then pass that around. We are going to walk through, you establish the email, you are then going to make your boot media, run your basic installation and updates on your system that you're going to build, and then you're going to establish a way to secure that connection without having to poke a hole in your router. So from the outside, there is no outside connection. The only way to connect to it is if you're connected to the VPN. So you are safe, theoretically, from most unskilled attackers. If there is a nation state that is gunning for you that hard, yes, you may run into some issues. But then again, you probably did something to upset somebody an awful lot. This is not going to be your run-of-the-mill person doing whatever it would take to violate most VPN apps. And by the way, raise your hand and tell me I'm wrong if I'm wrong there, or just shout it out. I mean, if you know of like real holes in WireGuard, say something. Because WireGuard is the new hotness when it comes to VPN tech for the free tier of things. So then we get to the platform, which we are going to actually set up our own domain. We're going to set up get a real certificate from Let's Encrypt for nothing. And you get to use that to establish secure connection over the VPN. So not only are we securing the pipe from the outside, we are securing the connection from your client to the server through the browser. So we are extra secure in the majority of ways. Why do we care about that? Because you don't want people who you don't want seeing your stuff, right? This should be private. This is your stuff. You, your family, your significant other, your friends, the people you grant access to this. So you want to make sure you take steps to limit that access. So to get there, we have to anchor somewhere. So I said step 1 or step 0 is getting a password manager set up, because you're going to want to store all of these individual account things you're about to do, and you're going to need a few of those. We'll start with it and just build with me here, okay? So we need a certain kind of account. We need a free tiered account that acts as an identity provider, because that will be used to gain access to other tools, to provide authentication to these other tools. I'm going to take a breath and ask, are there any questions about what I'm going through so far? Does anyone have any counterpoints they'd like to make?
I just want to know, will all this be written down somewhere?
Oh yes, we will get there too. So,
You're taking notes, right?
I like reading some.
so again, through here we have the password manager, our new email account. We'll use our email account, which doubles as authentication to a service. Thank you. And from that service, you will be able to gain Tailscale, which is the service provider for the WireGuard VPN, which will provide access to your stuff for nothing. Because they want you to say, oh, this is cool. I think my company should do something with this. Now, here's the fun part. These accounts are the ones that can be used to give you the Tailscale account. That's the part you get to choose whichever of these email basic things you want to do. Cool. But you have to authenticate. You cannot email and ID your way into Tailscale, which will become kind of clear as to why we need that in a minute. So you have to choose from a specific limited range of free emails, but you want to establish that there because it gives you this fresh space to start from. You don't want to mix this in to your actual, think of it as a management account. This is you managing your personal cloud stuff. So you're going to take advantage of the free thing that they're going to attempt to farm, which will, if anything, be ads for the services that you are trying to enroll in at no cost. So we are going to flow from the email account, which gives us authentication to GitHub and to Tailscale. GitHub gets us into Tailscale and DuckDNS, and from there you can use Cloudflare or some other method with your DuckDNS to get your Let's Encrypt cert, because we have to do some stuff with DNS so that we can prove we own this domain. All of these things stack together to make this work. And by stacking together, what I'm saying is we have an identity piece, the domain management piece, the privacy pieces, and then once secured, how we are going to use subdomains. Because the last thing you want to have to do, well, I mean, actually, you get to choose what you want to do. But what I'm recommending is that you get to use subdomains, so it's name of the service.yourthing.duckdns.org. By doing this, you have access to a seemingly endless array of things as long as you're willing to tinker and play just a little bit. Does this thing have an app store? We'll get to that later. So what do you actually need? And that's where I hand this out here. Please take this, pass it around. Take a look. What you are looking at is a single board computer called a Raspberry Pi. It is ARM-based, meaning not Intel-based, like a lot of our laptops are usually AMD or Intel chipsets. This is a project computer. People use them to run small things at home or send them up in weather balloons to take pictures of things, or as a small media server or player, play retro arcade games, or it can actually be your home server. A very light home server, but you can use, if you'll notice on that little board, I have two different examples and two different examples of external storage. The Raspberry Pi by itself starts as a device that uses a memory card to boot from. It's not very fast, but it works. The challenge is that those little memory cards wear out. And if with as much stuff as you will be doing on a home server like this, you're going to want a better, faster, more durable experience. To do that, I am recommending that you connect an external drive, and you have to go explain to the Raspberry Pi, we will boot from here, but now I want you to look over there, and I want you to work from this other location. And by doing that, you are going to run the entire operating system on the external drive. If you go with the option of a Raspberry Pi 3, it doesn't put enough power through the USB ports to be able to run the external drive without help, so use an external USB hub. The power of the hub will drive the drive, the connection to the Raspberry Pi. It will work together so that you can boot from here and run from there. If you're using the Raspberry Pi 4, which is the other one on the board that has two little video outputs, it does put out enough, and without doing any fancy magic, you can run it from an external NVMe or M2 drive, which is exactly what I am doing. So it's literally USB to a little, looks like almost like a remote control, but inside is a little storage device. And I can't remember what NVMe stands for, but it's easy enough to look up. The point is it might as well be a solid-state storage device or flash memory drive. Okay, that, or you can go as far as take the old computer you've got sitting under a desk in your old office, in your closet, somewhere. Take that old machine and put it back to work. It's a perfectly serviceable machine as long as it has at least 1 gigabyte of RAM. 1. Because that is all that is on that Raspberry Pi 3. And I tell you that I am currently running a home server off of a Raspberry Pi 3 right now. It does work. It's limited. I'm not going to lie, it's limited, but it does plenty. Okay, the other option, if you have more resources at your disposal, go to a place like RackNerd or look up on lowendbox.com and find a white box virtualized server of your choosing for whatever price point appeals to you. My point is, for under $100, for sure, you can set one of these up. And you may just have a piece of equipment sitting there waiting to be used. It could be your old Mac Mini. It could be your old student machine. It could be one of those NUCs, NUC, the little Intel machines. It could be anything. But I'm going to go through the quick stages of what we do to get a Raspberry Pi going here. So Raspberry Pi has a version of a tool that's out there, and it helps you to make bootable media for the Pi. You choose, now, in our example here, you can choose one of the options. I'm going to tell you that for a Raspberry Pi 3, you can choose the name of the device. It'll guide you down the path. Take the headless option. And by headless, I mean choose the operating system where you choose additional options. And from there, you're going to choose, I did the Raspberry Pi Lite, the OS Lite, because it's the headless. You know, why choose a headless one? I could certainly get one that has the ability to put up a window and plug it into a monitor. But why would I want to waste all that extra processing power on running video and a whole desktop? You can get by a little bit more easily, give yourself some overhead by running it without all the graphics. So that's what I'm recommending here. And when you select that version, Raspberry Pi Imager, they've added a neat feature where you get to customize some of the things that your Raspberry Pi will do out of the box when you plug it in the first time. So if you go and edit those settings, you can do things like set your Wi-Fi country so it can use a specific set of settings on the Wi-Fi chip. You can also tell it what the Wi-Fi network is. Hey, tip, it's case sensitive. So if you were fancy when you put in the name of your Wi-Fi network, or if you have one from a company and it's got it on the little sticker on the back of the box, Put it in exactly as you see it listed, or the Raspberry Pi will not find it when you try to boot from the Raspberry Pi later, and you will have to tweak with it. Nobody likes to do that. Also, set the localized time, set an account, turn on, make sure SSH is on the Services tab, and then hit Go. And here is the actual support page that you can go through to look up. Oops, that's not the right one. A correction I'll need to make later. Tip, if you only have one machine at home, you don't have a second monitor, because when you go to set up your Raspberry Pi at first, if you're not going to SSH, secure shell remotely, into your Raspberry Pi, you're going to need another monitor. You can use an HDMI capture card, USB dongle thing, to plug into your computer for about 10 to 15 bucks, and plug the video cable from the Raspberry Pi right into your machine, and then open your camera app. Like on the Mac, I believe it's Photo Booth. On Windows, it's just called Camera. And you know how on your mobile device there's a little change the camera angle, and it goes to the selfie camera or goes back the other way? Windows has that built in. You hit that little option and it'll change. Hit it again and you'll find your capture device, which is how I did half of the recordings and the screenshots for this, was literally plugging in an external mouse or keyboard to the Pi and directly video capturing into my machine. This machine, actually. This is the machine I built it on. I have other machines I could have done this on, but here we are on my machine I picked up from a pawn shop during the student sale. It had a crack in the case and it still works just fine. My point is, it doesn't take much. This doesn't have to be expensive. Okay, so this is what it'll look like when you connect to it. Don't expect it to look fancy, but you're going to be able to see the command line, which is all you need to do the next steps. Otherwise, SSH to your device and go to town. Questions at this point? Yes?
Just a little caveat on the Pi 5, there is no default SSH login, so you have to remember to do that step. Because I was like, oh, I'll just log in as Raspberry Pi.
No, which is why it's very important. Yeah, thank you. That's an important note. I hope everyone heard that. Once upon a time, the build for the Raspberry Pi came with a default login. Now you must create one. And so if you're going to go log in, make sure you do that in the Raspberry Pi Imager, which you can get for free from raspberrypi.org. Thank you. That's a very good note. Okay. Now, who here has installed or done a Debian build, Ubuntu, any of the Debian-based things? Has anyone not done this before? Okay, so first things you always do when you set up for the first time, you go and turn on your new Debian build. Anything on Ubuntu, anything that's built on that underneath, is you're going to use the command. Now, sudo is for, hey, I'm admin, so do this admin thing. And then apt is advanced package tool. And what do you want it to do? Update, because it's going to go look for updates. And so it's going to update its list of applications and compare it to what's on the machine, and then tell you you can do upgrades, which you then say, mother may I, Simon says, sudo apt upgrade -y, so you don't have to hit enter again, and that will execute. Now go get a snack, because that could take a while, especially if you're doing this on a Pi 3. Even with a hard drive, it's not the fastest. So doing the basic update, you should have no issue because you set the Wi-Fi, right? Well, maybe you mistyped something. Maybe you've done something squirrely to your own network, and the machine doesn't come up even though you physically plug in a network cable. You might have to do a little bit of fixing. So let's take half a second to talk about the modern tooling it takes, because I used to know how to do this, and I don't anymore, apparently. So the answer is a command called nmcli, which is Network Manager CLI for Command Line Interface, right? nmcli. So you have to say, mother may I, or Simon says, sudo nmcli connection. Tell me what the connections are available on this machine, which will dump out stuff. Go look for wired connection 1. Make sure there is one. Because if you're doing a Raspberry Pi, which this example is for, there will be an Ethernet port, and it'll be called wired connection 1 because that's what the coding says to do. Now that we know And that's why I'm telling you, in case you're doing a different machine, you want to know what it's called on yours. So in this case, I knew it was wired connection 1. So here's the full string. Take a picture. This is a heck of a string. But you're basically telling it all those bullet points. We're going to say, I'm going to modify wired connection 1. I'm going to set its IP address manually, its network address manually. I have to tell it where the gateway is so it can get out to the internet. And then I'm going to tell it where my DNS is if we need to. And you can add your own if you prefer.
What do you use Google?
So I used Google. I need to make sure that the name's resolved for my certificate later. So 1111 is from a company called Cloudflare. 8888 is the phone book of the internet through Google's services. And this way your machine is, now, you may plug it in and it works just fine, meaning you don't have to do this. On the off chance you do, here is how you get out of jail free. All right. Next, now that we are on the network, we've run our basic updates, we have our machine talking to an external hard drive, and what do we do next? Now what are we going to do? We're going to make sure we can connect securely from anywhere. We're going to get Tailscale. Tailscale is really neat because there are clients for almost every gosh darn thing. I've got them for my mobile phone, I've got them for the desktop, I've got them for the Raspberry Pi, I've got it for my NAS. So basically, they will give you a free tier account, which is good for, I think it's 5 separate user account logins and up to 100 plus devices per login. So that's amazing. That's a lot of things. You don't realize how many of those add up, but it's worth it. Because what we're going to do is the thing you have to do. If you're on a Debian system, you want to add the actual repo. So whenever you get updates, you get their updates. And their software knows how to find their servers. So you're going to use, and I'm lazy, okay? Lazy. That's what the key word to this is. Here's what you need to do, these commands. Well, if you move your mousey over here on your Windows connected or your graphic connected machine, a little set of copy boxes will appear in the right corner. Or just highlight, copy, and paste in your command line window and execute that. Because what this will do is run a script that will add their repositories to your machine so it knows how to find their stuff. And then you run sudo apt-get update. Again, you want to update your list of available applications and software because what did you do? You just added a new resource, but it doesn't know yet. The machine isn't aware of it. All you said is, here's where to find this. Okay, but what am I going to go find? Well, let's run update to go and populate what you're going to find. Then you run install Tailscale, and when it's done, you say sudo Tailscale up. And by doing that, it'll pop up a little URL on the screen in your SSH session. Open that in the web browser on the machine you're running SSH from, and you're going to authenticate. And here is where that email account made all the difference, whichever one you chose. Now, I chose a Google account, but you have to make sure you authenticate with one of those options. So you could have an Apple one, a Google one, an Outlook one. I went with Google, and you're using that as an identity provider to gain access to a Tailscale account. Okay? That doesn't make sense yet, but it will, because what it's doing is saying anywhere I have somebody hold up a mobile device. Hold up a mobile device. Do you want to access your stuff from your mobile device? Of course you do, which means I need what? The app, the client, on every endpoint that is going to make use of this. That means, at the very least, your Raspberry Pi, from this demo's perspective, and your mobile device need to have that client and authenticated to the same account. Questions? What does Tailscale give us? The ability to connect from anywhere except this school network in this room. It lets you use anywhere a VPN is allowed, you can access all of your stuff. Whether that's your shared address book between you and your entire family, or if you maybe want to do a shared family calendar and you have real trouble figuring out between their account and your account and the parental controls, maybe you set up a private calendar that only you guys can access, and then you share that family calendar that is connected securely over the Tailscale VPN to their device, your device, and your server, and no one else. Good use case. Anyway, DuckDNS. Now I want a domain, because I don't want to have to type in 192.168 or whatever the IP address would be. I want to use name of thing I care about, in this case, duckdns.org. DuckDNS is a free service that allows you to, it used to be, I used it under dynamic DNS days, DDDNS, right? You would use a dynamic service because why? I pay for internet, but I don't get to keep the same address, so it's going to change out from under me, and I need to make sure that I can still find myself. So you have to do fancy things with a script and make sure that that service gets updated every time something happens. This is so much better than that. It's so much easier now. So what you're going to do is get a duckdns.org account. Well, how do I have to sign up? Sort of. What you're going to do is you're going to use GitHub to authenticate. Well, wait, why do I want a GitHub account? I can see over here there's a little Google icon. Right, well that means you're tied to having to have a Google account. If I use my free email account from wherever I picked it up, I can go get a GitHub account, which is less company specific-ish. Yes, they're owned by a big company. The point is that I'm not stuck to one necessarily. Fun. Well, yes, we're going to try to balance all the evils out if we can, to at least get somewhere, because once this is established, you can change some stuff around. But meanwhile, I'm suggesting you log in with your GitHub account, so that means, hey, go make a GitHub account. Well, when I go make a GitHub account, that's another password. Yes, that's why we got the free password manager before, because you're going to have to maintain some of these things, and there's a lot of them. Okay. Now you get to your Tailscale admin page, and you can see, I feel so safe. I'm foolish. I'm showing you the actual page from this account. Example local cloud is the account I'm using, and that was the fancy name, nice and easy to remember. It happens to also show you each of these devices and whether or not they're online, when the last time Tailscale saw them, and what the relative name inside the system is. But more importantly, this is an internal private IP address that no one else outside of your Tailnet can get to unless you grant them permission. So you use that address anywhere you see IP address coming up. Like, here's a fancy thing you can try to do, but maybe you don't want to do it. It's split DNS, because they've got their own private little phone book of the internet that they maintain inside Tailscale. This means that it takes time. It's the horrible reality. If you go and buy an actual domain, and you go and make an update to that domain, it can take up to 24 hours when you make that change to realize the address change you made in the real world, which means go spend a day doing something else and not clicking update. You ever buy something and just sit on the tracking page and just, how about now? Is it any closer now? No? I'm still going to hit the button, but that's what it becomes. So it's the worst part of waiting. You can do this fancy thing called split DNS and say, whenever something tries to call the domain I just signed up for and put in the box at DuckDNS, I want you to specially look up these faster, more readily updated DNS locations. I want someone who's got a fast phone book so that it can get found more readily. Why? Because I want my certificate. And that's the part that sticks. Meanwhile, so what have we done? We built a machine, we ran the updates, we went and got our email account, we set up our password manager so that we can manage those passwords. We then went and got our Tailscale account set up so that we now know how to connect securely from here to there. What is next? Well, we're building towards setting up a platform that'll act kind of like a desktop computer in space. What do I mean? Or, okay, let's say a phone in space, right? Because if you use iOS or Android, what do? You go to an app store. You go to an app store and you install an application, just like you used to do on a desktop PC. You might still do it. But people prefer to do what? Even with Steam and things like that. I want an ecosystem. I can hit this, do that, and I don't have to know a bunch of stuff. Well, I'm sorry. The truth is, this is all about learning a bunch of stuff. So, in this journey that we are currently on, if we follow these loose recipes, you will get to a place where you run all your own toys. Because Docker might as well be 3 raccoons in a trench coat to me. But it's a form of virtualization that allows me to use one machine. Really, it's like gerrymandering for computing resources. Well, you go just over here, and then over. So one machine can do a boatload of things without overloading it. It's what makes this thing work. That's what Docker is. So you follow the actual Docker install path, go to their website. They've got a page that says, here's a script. There are other places that reference this script by a single line. This is what it's doing. What did we do last time with Tailscale? Same thing we're going to do here. Add the repository, run the update, install Docker. Once that's there, now you're finally at the point in the road where you get to choose the platform to install. There's more than one, and it's a true rabbit hole, but all of them come back to one thing. And that is understanding just enough Docker to break a lot of stuff. Or come out with services you can use. Be willing to break this and build it again, and break it and build it again. And don't just get frustrated and break it in half. Get frustrated, walk away, come back, and add another round of understanding. Because each time you do, you build something useful. This is the command. Once you have Docker up, you run this single command. What is it? Yet another curl script call. I'm calling a script to run this installation, and this is what it's going to look like. Very exciting. It's going to look like a bunch of lines moving from the left side to the right side as it pulls these individual images or drive files to your server, because that's what you have built now. It's no longer your old student machine. It is now your server. It's not just that project computer. It is going to be a powerful tool in getting frustrated and learning things. Meanwhile, if you wanted a different explanation than just the one I gave, you can go to this guy's page, guides.angles.zip, and he has an entire guide for setting up Cosmos Server. What is Cosmos Server? Cosmos Server is like installing a desktop in cyberspace. You're going to go to this thing once you've got it up and running, and it's going to have a tile to launch an app that you choose. There's a little app store in there, and then you're going to find out the thing you want to install isn't in their app store, but it exists. So how do I modify this thing and manage it? And the answer is, that's part of your learning that comes next. Hey, that turned off. How do I get that back?
You call tech support.
Didn't want power off?
Need really tall and power button on a projector.
Yep, it's,
Turn on again?
well, the question is, will it come back? Oh, it will! Okay,
Or I'm all the way from muted.
so, pretending nothing just happened, when it's done, you're going to actually have to go and jump to either this or the IP address of your server. If you remember, when we go back to this, whatever one of these is your server, that's the IP address you would use. So use your Tailscale admin page to know the IP address. Make sure you enter that as the IP address in your password manager. Use that as your shortcut to find your way. Okay. So when you actually get there and you're actually setting up Cosmos, the first thing you're going to do is make sure that you tick the box to clean in any previous installations, because it may blow up during this process. So be prepared to go and fix that. Make sure you take notes as you do it. It's going to start and say, hey, Docker, I found Docker. Cool. It'll warn you if it's not there. That's nice. Next. Now, hey, I don't have a database. So click Connect, which really means go make me a database. And when you choose that, it's going to go out and pull all the bits it needs to set up its own database, automating all of the stuff that you would have otherwise had to do. Because that's what I would have done is, now go load the Node package manager. Now go install these, now go find Ruby. Nobody does that anymore. They do this. Somebody writes a script and it just goes, whooah! And when you get there, hey, look, database is now connected. So you go next. And it is, yeah, I knew as I know how much you love MongoDB, friend. So now here's the hardest part of this. This is the bit that breaks my brain. This is the part of the waiting. This is setting up HTTPS. If you want the certificate, by the way, you don't have to use a certificate. You can build this thing and not even go through the domain part. You can build it locally, access it through an IP address, and every time you go to add a new something to it, you'll have to use IP address, colon, and a port number to get to each of your different services. So I tried that and I said, this is not what I want for my life. It doesn't mean that it doesn't work. It does work. I thought it would be more elegant to show off that I was smart, and I asked for so much help. I asked my brother, who works with stuff. I asked a lot of people. I went to the Discord. I talked to people. What you wind up doing is, you remember how you set up duckDNS and you create some name that you're going to have .duckdns.org. You're going to put in the IP address, the private IP address of the server from your Tailscale page. And then you have to, this is why, by the way, you used the split DNS option earlier. So again, you update that faster phone book of the internet. You don't have to, but it's an option. And that's, by the way, what it would have looked like if you went and added that manually. And I'm just throwing it there is because if you're going through this later and you decide, gosh, I am frustrated and I just want something to make this go faster, because otherwise you'll be waiting till the next physical day. I'm not kidding. OK, so let's go back now, pretending that we did that. When I go to set up the host name, this is what I'm going to replace with my custom name that I just made. And when I do that, notice it says, hey, you're using an IP address or local stuff, which means you can't use anything but a self-signed certificate, which is also a no-no. That's not trustworthy outside of your network. But wait, I thought I was using this on a private network that only I have access to. You're exactly right, which means you don't have to do this. However, it's telling you about a limitation. Just be aware. If you want to go the extra mile, however, you can go and type in the name that you put into duckdns.org, which, like I did, and then notice it changes. Oh, hey, you seem to be using a name. This means we can actually use Let's Encrypt, which is a free certificate provider that's out in the world, built by the EFF and some other nice folks. Now, to use that, you have to tell it who your DNS provider is. The phone book of the internet. Whose phone book are you using? Well, I use duckDNS to get my domain, so I have to choose this. If you're going to use that, you have to tell Let's Encrypt how to go knock on the door and go, excuse me, is this a real place? So imagine a little person running up to the door going knock, 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 but they have to know the secret knock. In this case, a secret knock is a token, a specialized string of characters that will be used to present it. So if you go back to your duckDNS thing, the account you created will be here. The token will be right here, which you will now highlight and copy and go back to Cosmos with, and you will go to the set up your provider, right? That's what we were doing before. We come back and we paste that into the blank for duckDNS token. And you remember before I made a fuss about your email address. Let's Encrypt binds your email address to your account. So when you take that token, it's looking for the token string from duckDNS. It wants this to know that, oh, this goes with that token. So when it says Let's Encrypt email in that form, you have to use the same address you used to get into GitHub, because you used your GitHub login to get into duckDNS. All of these things do go together. And by putting that together, you now have the information you need. That email address for your GitHub account, plus this token in the box, and then check the wildcard box. And notice here, this is the default address from my real world internet, which is not right because that's not the address that should be there. What address should be there? Who knows? What's the address that should be in this little box?
Private address.
The private address. Why isn't it showing up? Because when I go to DuckDNS, I apparently forgot to hit update IP. I pasted it in there and didn't hit that, and the session ran out, so it never updated it. So when Let's Encrypt goes to knock on the door, the wrong address is sitting there. That's not going to help anybody. So instead, I went back, logged back in, made sure it was updated, and then okay, there. So, and then it came up with the right address. Yes?
Is there any reason you chose RFC 6598 IP space?
That's what Tailscale did.
Okay.
So I'm doing whatever the freebie option was, and I have no idea what you do. I know that an RFC is a request for comment. Those are basically the standards of the internet. I do not know what that number is. What is that number? Enlighten us.
This 100.64/10 is reserved for CGNAT.
What is CGNAT?
IPv4 to IPv6 carrier grade NAT.
Okay, so that's network address translation. So that is the space that Tailscale has provisioned for their free accounts at least. So that is a decision they have made, and I do not know the why behind that.
Okay.
Preserve IP addresses, yeah.
To preserve it.
Being a real one.
Okay, so interesting. So also, tick the box for wildcard and go next. And now it's going to want you to create an admin account. And when we go forward, we then say we've entered all the information and things and hit apply and restart, which means it's going to go and knock on the door and say, hey, Let's Encrypt, go get me a cert. And then that'll happen. And you'll say, I just did all of these things and that happens? And it turns out it's because DNS has not yet updated. And it takes time. And if you let the Tailscale DNS be the only one you update, you're going to wait a full 24 hours plus. Which I thought, I was beside myself. I made myself get up, leave the room after trying so many times to get this to go. But it can't go any faster because the Let's Encrypt query says, knock, knock. Is this real? And the answer was, can't find it. Well, I guess you don't get to have a certificate. Yes, sir?
With the free DuckDNS, can you change the time delay?
So not on the free tier that I've seen. There is no adjustment to that. It is set. I think it's set to 300. So it's still, the update can happen faster. I've actually seen it. So be patient. There are so many different variables here. It could be your system specs. It could be whichever DNS you're pointing at. Maybe you didn't take the fancy step of doing the split DNS. Be patient. You might have to sacrifice something. The real sacrifice is time and your sanity. And when you go to try again, when you go to access it, eventually that attempt will error out. The attempt to launch the service will fail. And when it can't get the certificate, it'll fall back to HTTP. When it eventually does, you will get here. So before, it was a question in my head of, well, did it even work? What you get to learn to do is to look at the log. The logs are your friends and your enemies. And there's a command. Sudo systemctl status name of service. Bless you. And you will see what it's currently doing. And so you will get used to, or should get used to, taking a glance at that to see what's currently going on. It's like asking, how about now? How about now? Now? How about now? And that's what it feels like, endlessly. But then you will see when the error scrolls by, and you will know if it's working or not. And that's why you restart your service, because every time you stop and restart Cosmos Cloud, it will attempt to go and ask the question again. The question is this domain I'm calling to a real domain? If you were to use the command nslookup, does it come back with my private IP address? That's really the hitch here. So don't you dare give up if you've gotten this far, you understand this about the process. Because this is a lot, right? We have stacked 6 different tiny recipes together to get here because I wanted to learn. I wanted to not try to build a lamp stack. I wanted to understand how this works. Why? So I can listen to my podcasts on there or somewhere else, and it doesn't matter where I start from. If I stop in the car, I can pick up at the desktop machine when I switch headsets, and it just works. And it's mine, and I don't have to go to someone else. And if I decide to change my phone provider, the things I've set up separately are still mine. And so if a kid who used to think this was scary, which just tells you how old I am, you can definitely do this. Somebody get that freaking duck away from me if you know that reference. But the reward for your perseverance will be this login screen. This is the Cosmos Cloud login based on the information you populated it with. And there's a ton more that you can do. And I'm telling you this not just because it's a proof of concept, but because this is my Raspberry Pi 3 running at my home right now. This is actually a free version of Linktree. Granted, all those links are not real. Only the GitHub is real. And it points to the example local cloud GitHub account, which has nothing in it, but that's not the point. The point is this is a legitimate login. And if I go back to this is connected securely over Tailscale on this laptop through my phone back to my house. And so this is my Cosmos Cloud server, which I can then go and do whatever I want. And if that wasn't good enough, I can also go to example local cloud 2. And if I remember to put in the silly thing, this is an alternate one I'm using running on a Raspberry Pi 4. That is literally running on, if you have that little example I had there with the little, looks like a remote control. It may be a little slow over this connection, but it's running a completely different one called Casa OS. And that is yet another whole platform that runs with a lot more Python behind it, but still uses Docker. Cosmos is the one I think that's a little more polished at this point. And just, I apologize for the speed, but that's over my cellular internet. And so this is a separate connection running on a separate tiny single board computer on my desk at my house, running off of a 256 NVMe drive in a little silver box. And so, right, and I've added certain things, and you have to set up a reverse proxy. That's a separate whole conversation. The point is, each of these things, when you set them up, when you build them through Cosmos, you will have a built-in. Each of those are their own separate reverse proxy connections. If I go to the bookshelf and it goes to log in, ooh, it's having to work hard there. But the point is, each of these are subdomains, and each of them are routable, and they have a certificate that is protecting them, and it works. I'm sorry? Proxmox? So Proxmox is heavier. It's not to say, because it works very well, and I have one of those too. However, that's running on a big fat server, and this is running on a Raspberry Pi 3. So you have 1 gig of RAM, and it's functional, and it's serviceable for certain things. Don't try to run an Office Suite server from it. Don't try to run a giant Colab server from it. But if you want some simple things like your shopping lists and shared address books and things like that, this is plenty. A Raspberry Pi 4 with 4 gigs of RAM will let you run virtualized instances of web browsers, which means if you ever are curious about a link and it's not safe, is it safe? You launch that browser and run it there, because that one's not going to get infected, because you're going to blow that one up and reload it from 0 in a second and not risk your whole machine. And a host of other options. I'm actually running a Raspberry Pi 5 over a separate connection on just a box of disks, and it's got terabytes of storage, and that didn't even take any special magic, because once you understand this the first time or you get through the harder one, it gets easier to rebuild them and easier to make it work. It is so absolutely worth it. You are now at the starting line of a lot of different things. The next question is, what do you want to do with it?
I use mine to run Pi-hole.
Pi-hole is one of the, I have that running on my original Pi 1.
It's actually in a Docker container running on a Raspberry Pi 5 that when I need to update it, I just blow away the Docker and reinitialize it.
Exactly. So here, if I can do this, will it run? Will it break everything?
And I haven't gotten to the point where I have a Tailscale set up, but once I do, I could then have my DNS on my phone also go through the Pi-hole and block ads on my phone.
Exactly, because once you're routing through the Pi-hole, now all of your traffic is captured that way, which is great, by the way, for some of those nice simple word games where they just have ads every other round and they get knocked out, and so now you just play the game.
We don't get YouTube ads anymore.
There you go. So here are some amazing resources to find out what applications you can run. Here are some resources like Composerize. If you want to make any Docker command string into a compose file, this tool will help you make it or unmake it. So if there's a compose file you want to break down into the individual commands, use Composerize and it will help you do that. And that is way more time than I should have taken, and I greatly appreciate you sticking with me as long as you have. Are there any questions, or are people just dead?
How are you managing your Docker containers?
I am a fan of Portainer.
That's what I use. Cool.
Uh,
I'm a Docker moron.
Yes, I too am a Docker moron. And the thing I found that was so amazing is installing Portainer originally. Oh, I know what I forgot. Did I put it? I didn't put it on there. This person has done a bunch of work. I've actually paid them the money because I said I've gotten so much use and value out of this. This is a person who will explain how to turn your Synology, which is a brand of NAS, into a server, a home server for you. And that's where I actually started doing this. I picked up a used Synology NAS and I started tinkering. And what I found was when I would get stuck and say, man, I really want an instance of fill in the blank. This person has it set up for using through the tooling on, well, what I also realized is, wait, this is a fantastic resource for compose files. So I now understand, oh, wait, this is where the data files are going to be stored. This is how I'm going to make these changes. So if I use the Marius hosting stuff, it's a great starting point for me to try to leap forward the rest of the way rather than starting in absolute zero. And if you're using a Synology, you can absolutely use it to run these things as well. Marius hosting, gotta say good things, used it a lot, definitely helped get me started, and still to this day, if I'm like, I just want to know what a compose files would look like for blah, I need an example. 8 out of 10 times, there's a version of that application here. And then I can adapt that to my Cosmos. So if you're not using the Cosmos, they have a market in Cosmos. When you go to the market, hey, there are a bunch of things. You can add stuff to the App Store. There are a few additional things. It was in the previous screen I gave you with the links. So if you find something isn't in here, what you can do is you can manually add it importing the compose file. So you take the compose file that you get from wherever, Composerize, put it in here, and when it goes and adds the application, or if you absolutely cheese out, like I also have been known to do, because I sometimes can't figure that out either, I will go to my Portainer, and from Portainer, I will use the stacks option. Oh, well, that's no fun. I need to fix that. The point is to use Portainer to deploy the application and then add a tile in Cosmos. Again, separate conversation. It's all learning, it's all valuable, it's all doable. And I've spent quite a bit of time doing this, but getting through these recipes and understanding how you come out on the other side means that I can add now, I have my library of podcasts I want to listen to, and they're available from wherever. I have access to now a managed calendar system. I want to do one for making invoices to do little things I'm going to do. There's one called Invoice Ninja. You can stand that up. You want to do volunteers? Yes, you can use one of the free tiers of, oh, I only need 100 volunteers, but I can learn how to do that too. And each time I do this, I get a little bit smarter about how Compose File works, how Docker works, how to start and stop these services. And that, dear friends, is a useful skill, a real-world skill set, and a starting point upon which you can build towards things that could be useful in, let's say, a job market. Okay, you've been so kind to listen to me. Are there any questions?
You still use your Synology, and how many Raspberry Pis do you have?
I may not want to answer that second question.
More than a dozen.
I may have,
Less than 10?
no?
Less than 20?
We're going to move on from that, and I'm going to tell you, I am definitely still using the Synology because it was the original reverse proxy I learned how to use, because it had one built in and it would easily get a Let's Encrypt certificate. By the way, if you have a Synology, Tailscale will go out and get, without any waiting of any kind, you can say Tailscale space cert if you turn on the mode, and it will go get you a Let's Encrypt cert good for 3 months. You will just have to remember to renew it. You will forget to renew it and everything will suddenly stop working. Also, Tailscale by default has a special key or token that expires every 6 months, requiring you to log that device back in. You can turn that off so that your server doesn't suddenly magically disappear from the internet and you're like, why? And it doesn't happen while you're traveling somewhere. Because that's what started all this, is that I was trying to use something from my home machine, and it turns out my home router gave up. It didn't matter all the other things I put into place. The home router fried. Literally, I came home and it was like DOA. So I said, I'm going to get a VPS, a virtual private server, for under $60 a year and learn how to do this. And then that led me to, well, wait, can I secure that connection? Oh, wait a minute. I can do this from a Pi at home? I already have the server. What else can we do?
What if your router dies at home?
And so that's why, if the router dies at home, I have the cloud-based one. So I have one to tinker on there. And now I'm working on how to properly back up or mirror it from here to there, so one or both of them will be alive. This is the learning process that I am forcing myself to do, because I never again want to be like I was at the end of that job, my first big job out of school, where I said I don't have to learn again. I have to be a lifelong learner. I have to be. I can't spend all my time talking about what was, because that way lies stagnation and suddenly waking up one day realizing I only know how to build a lamp stack. That's a scary moment. LAMP doesn't even exist anymore in that format. So you've got to learn again. And the only thing you can realize is that it'll be time to learn again soon. So make that your process, because that's what will keep you thinking. Other questions?
I know some people got to get home
Yeah, no.
and stuff, so we can all hang out afterwards, but for those of y'all that have to get home, don't feel awkward about
Nope.
hanging out.
And thank you very, very much for your time. Thank you for paying attention. Thank you for listening.